My wife and father-in-law forced me out into the cold rain, slamming the door in my face while my newborn cried inside. I stood there, drenched, begging to hold my baby as they laughed from the window. The next morning, I came back, but I wasn't alone. When the door opened, their faces froze because the woman beside me was the last person they ever expected. There are moments in life that shatter everything you thought you knew, moments that leave you gasping for air. For me, that moment began with a knock on my front door, a knock that didn't just announce a visitor, but an invasion that would rip my family apart. It's a sound I'll never forget, sharp, impatient, carrying a chilling promise of regret. My name is Leo. I'm 32, and this story starts just 2 weeks after my son, Sam, was born. My wife, Sarah, was utterly exhausted, and her father, Victor, had decided our home was his personal revolving door. Again, this wasn't a new thing. Ever since Sam arrived, Victor acted like he paid our mortgage. Groceries we didn't ask for, unsolicited parenting advice, making himself far too comfortable. At first, I tried to be patient. I knew Sarah adored him. He'd raised her alone after her mom passed when Sarah was 16. Victor wasn't overtly cruel, but he had this old-school arrogance, the kind that made him believe his decisions were gospel. And when it came to Sam, he had opinions. So many opinions. Every choice I made, formula versus breast milk, how to swaddle, Victor would correct me. That's not how a real father does it. He'd smirk, looking at Sarah like she'd back him up. And usually she did. That's where the cracks started. Before Sam, Sarah and I were rock solid. We met at 26, married 3 years later. She was fiercely independent, funny, loyal, a little sarcastic. But after the baby, something changed. Victor's voice became louder than mine in her head. Dad says we should. Dad thinks it's better if. My disagreements were dismissed. I was always the unreasonable one. The night it all really kicked off. The rain hadn't stopped all day. The house felt heavy with the drumming sound on the windows. Sarah was upstairs feeding Sam, and I was finally catching a break, half asleep on the couch. Then that knock. Victor didn't even wait. He just walked in. "Evening," he said, hanging his soaked jacket on the rack I'd built myself. "I brought some things for the baby." His tone suggested I should be grateful. He had a habit of buying useless stuff. Bottles we didn't need, blankets reeking of cigarette smoke, unsafe toys. "Hey, Victor," I forced a smile. "You could have called." He looked at me like I was insane. Why would I need to call to visit my daughter and grandson? He brushed past me, heading for the stairs. "Sarah, you up there?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "She's feeding Sam. Can you give her a minute?" He turned back, halfway up, his eyes narrowing. "You sound tense, Leo. Everything all right? Getting enough sleep?" It was dripping with condescension, a power play. I bit back a sharp retort. "Yeah, we're fine. Just tired." He chuckled, that dry, dismissive sound. New fathers always think they're fine until they aren't. Then he disappeared upstairs. I sat there, listening to the faint voices from the nursery. He was lecturing again. 20 minutes later, Sarah came down, her face tight. "Dad thinks Sam's not latching right." "He's fine, Sarah," I said, sitting up. "The doctor said he's gaining weight perfectly." "Well, Dad says if we don't fix it now, it could cause problems later." I exhaled slowly. "Sarah, with all due respect, your dad raised you 30 years ago. Medicine's changed." Her eyes flashed. "So, you think he doesn't know anything?" "That's not what I said. But maybe we should stop treating his advice like gospel." Silence. Cold, sharp silence. The kind that makes you regret opening your mouth. She turned away, pulled out her phone, and started texting. Probably him. The next day, things got weirder. Victor started coming by more often, sometimes twice a day. I caught him rearranging the nursery furniture once. "Just trying to make things more practical, son," he said when I told him to stop. "Don't call me that." I muttered under my breath. "What was that?" he asked. "Nothing," I said quickly. He smirked, but the final straw came a week later. I came home from a long day at work to find the front door locked. I didn't think much of it. Maybe Sarah had put Sam down. I knocked softly. No answer. I tried the handle. Still locked. I knocked louder. The rain had picked up. "Sarah, it's me." Nothing. Then I saw movement. Through the window, Sarah was on the couch, holding Sam. Next to her, Victor. They looked at me like I was an intruder. I gestured to the door, half laughing in disbelief. "Hey, can you open up?" Sarah didn't move. Victor leaned forward, his expression calm, almost smug. "Maybe you should stay out there a while, Leo," he said through the glass. "You've been bringing too much stress into this house." My heart hammered. "What are you talking about? Let me in." Sarah just looked down at Sam, avoiding my eyes. "You're scaring him," she said softly. "I'm not scaring anyone. Sarah, please." But she turned away. The next few minutes were a blur of confusion and raw anger. The rain soaked through my clothes as I pounded on the door, trying not to shout. I could hear Sam crying now, and it tore something inside me. I literally begged for her to open the door, told her I just wanted to hold my son, to talk. Victor stood up, walked to the window, and smirked. "You should have listened, Leo. You've been undermining her. Maybe this will teach you some respect." Then they laughed. Not loud, not cackling, but soft, dismissive laughter that cut deeper than any scream. I stayed out there for almost an hour. By the time they let me in, the rain had stopped. I was shivering uncontrollably. Sarah handed me a towel without looking. Victor didn't say a word. I slept in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done to be treated like a stranger in my own home. But that night changed something in me. I realized I wasn't just fighting for respect. I was fighting for my place as a father. The next morning, looking at myself in the mirror, something clicked. I couldn't let this go. And that was the start of everything that came after, the plan, and the person I brought back to that same porch days later. Because when the door opened that morning and Sarah saw who was standing beside me, the color drained from her face. And Victor, for the first time since I'd known him, didn't have a single word to say. But before I tell you who it was, you need to understand how far things went before I finally snapped. Over the next few weeks, things between Sarah and me shifted in ways I couldn't explain. Subtle at first, a colder tone, shorter replies, that half-second pause before she'd answer my questions. She used to greet me with a smile. Now it was a blank stare over Sam's shoulder. And whenever Victor was around, which was almost every day, she seemed like a different person entirely. The witty, sharp, independent woman I married was gone, replaced by someone who nodded along to Victor's every word like it was law. I tried to convince myself it was postpartum stress, that she was just exhausted, hormonal, overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew it was more. Victor had gotten into her head, planting seeds of doubt about me for months, and now they were taking root. It wasn't just his criticism, it was how he did it. Always when I wasn't around to defend myself. I'd walk in mid-conversation and catch the tail end of something that made my stomach twist. "He doesn't seem ready for all this responsibility, Sarah," he'd say. Or, "You shouldn't have to do everything yourself, sweetheart. If he's not pulling his weight, maybe you need to make some decisions." And Sarah never disagreed. One afternoon, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the soft hum of the baby monitor. I walked into the kitchen and froze. Victor was sitting at the table, feeding Sam from a bottle. Sarah was nowhere in sight. "Where's Sarah?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Resting. She needed a break." "You weren't here, so I stepped in." I clenched my jaw. "You don't live here, Victor. You can't just—" He set the bottle down slowly and turned. "I have a key. Sarah gave it to me. That stopped me cold." "She what?" He smiled faintly. "You heard me." The air left the room. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'd specifically told Sarah we didn't need anyone else having keys, not even her father. She'd agreed, or so I thought. Victor must have seen the look on my face because he leaned back in his chair. "You've got a lot to learn about being a husband, Leo. Family doesn't need permission to care for their own." I took a slow breath, trying not to lose it. "You crossed the line." He shrugged. "Maybe, but at least someone's doing what's best for your wife and kid." When Sarah came downstairs a few minutes later, I pulled her aside. "Why did you give him a key?" She looked at me like I was overreacting. "Because he helps, Leo. He's family. It's not a big deal." "It's a big deal. It's our house. You can't just—" She cut me off. "Stop making everything about control. You're acting paranoid." That word, paranoid, hit harder than she realized. Because I wasn't imagining things. I could feel something shifting under the surface, a quiet, calculated push to make me look like the problem. The next weekend, Victor hosted a family dinner at our place. His idea, of course. He invited a few of Sarah's cousins and one of his old friends, people I barely knew. I walked in from the kitchen with a bowl of salad, and the conversation at the table went silent. Then one of the cousins, a smug guy named David, said, "So, you're the one keeping Sarah so busy, huh?" I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He smirked. Uncle Victor said you've been having trouble adjusting to fatherhood. My stomach lurched. He said what? Victor waved it off with that fake laugh of his. Don't take it personally, Leo. I was just saying you've been stressed, that's all. Everyone knows how tough new dads have it. But there was an undertone, a mocking one. Everyone at the table could feel it. Sarah didn't say a word. The dinner went downhill fast. Every time I spoke, someone interrupted. Every story I told, Victor corrected, making me look like an idiot. By dessert, I was sitting in silence, staring at the floor, my fists clenched under the table. After everyone left, I finally snapped. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I asked Sarah. She looked at me like I was overreacting again. It was just dinner. You're too sensitive. No, Sarah, it wasn't just dinner. He's turning everyone against me. She rolled her eyes. You always think everyone's out to get you. Maybe if you stop taking everything so personally, Sarah. I cut her off. He told your entire family that I'm not handling being a father. That's not a misunderstanding. That's manipulation. Her voice went quiet, but sharp. He's trying to help. I just stared at her. You really believe that? She didn't answer. From that night on, I started noticing more strange things. Little decisions made without me. Sam's pediatrician appointment rescheduled without telling me. Our shared bank account suddenly had new automatic transfer I hadn't authorized, paying for supplies Victor had supposedly bought. He was worming his way into every part of our lives. One morning, I came downstairs to find him at my kitchen table again, going through the mail. I nearly lost it. What are you doing? He looked up casually. You've got some bills here that need attention. You're opening my mail now? He didn't even blink. You should be thanking me. I'm trying to keep things running smoothly. Sarah's been saying how overwhelmed she feels because you keep interfering. I shoot back. He stood up slowly, stepping closer. Watch your tone, son. I took a step forward, too. Don't call me that. You don't get to walk into my house, go through my mail, and act like you're doing me a favor. We stood there, inches apart, the air thick with tension. Then Sarah walked in, holding Sam. What's going on? Ask your husband, Victor said, his voice dripping with calm superiority. He doesn't appreciate a helping hand. Helping hand? I snapped. He's invading our life, Sarah. She sighed, shifting Sam in her arms. You're both acting ridiculous. No, I said firmly. I'm done pretending this is normal. That was the first time she didn't defend him immediately. For a moment, her face softened, like she actually saw how exhausted I was. But then Victor said quietly, "See, he's angry again. That's not good for the baby." And just like that, she turned cold again. That line would come back to haunt me. A few days later, I woke up to find Sarah gone. No note, no text, nothing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Panic shot through me. I called her father. He answered on the second ring. "She's here," he said simply. I exhaled, trying to steady my voice. Why didn't she tell me she was leaving? She needed space, he said. You were pushing her too hard. I'm her husband, Victor. You can't just... He cut me off. She doesn't want to talk right now. Let her rest. Sam's fine. That last part made my blood boil. Sam's with you? Of course, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I grabbed my keys and drove straight there. When I arrived, Sarah met me at the door, looking calm. Too calm. You need to leave, Leo, she said softly. I just need a few days. I'm not leaving my son here, I said. Her father stepped out from behind her. Then you're not leaving at all, because you're not coming in. I stared at him, disbelief turning into rage. You can't do this. He smiled faintly. I already am. That night, I slept in my car outside their house, watching the light in the living room window flicker through the rain. I could see Sarah walking back and forth, holding Sam, and Victor always there, hovering, directing, controlling. It hit me then. This wasn't about helping anymore. This was about control. He'd never approved of me. In his eyes, I was the man who'd taken his daughter away. And now that Sam was here, he saw a chance to rewrite the rules, to push me out completely. I didn't go home for days. I stayed close, just in case, watching from a distance like some ghost haunting his own family. Sarah stopped answering my texts. When I finally got her on the phone, her voice was cold, almost rehearsed. "Dad says you need to focus on yourself for a while," she said. "Maybe you should stay somewhere else until you calm down." "Calm down," I repeated, my voice breaking. "Sarah, he's trying to separate us." She hesitated, and for a moment I thought I'd reached her. But then she whispered, "You're scaring me, Leo," and hung up. Those words played in my head over and over. I wasn't angry anymore. I was terrified, because if Victor was willing to go this far, I had no idea what he'd do next. And that's when I realized something chilling. He wasn't just manipulating Sarah. He was preparing to erase me from their lives completely. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to me, and definitely not to my son. What came next would change everything. The moment where lines got crossed that could never be uncrossed. And that was the point where I stopped trying to be the reasonable one. I'll never forget the morning it happened. The one that took everything I thought I knew about trust, about love, and burned it to the ground. It started quietly, too quietly. Sarah had finally agreed to come home after nearly a week at her father's place. I remember feeling this tiny spark of hope as I cleaned the house, cooked breakfast, blueberry pancakes, her favorite, the way I used to when things were good. I wanted to believe we could still fix this, that maybe the version of her I'd fallen in love with was still there, somewhere beneath the influence of her father. When she walked in, Sam in her arms, I froze. She looked different, not just tired or upset, but something deeper, detached, controlled. Her hair was tied up in that neat, perfect way Victor liked, and she wore a stiff expression that didn't belong to her. "Hey," I said softly. "You look tired. How was the drive?" She didn't answer. She sat Sam down in his bassinet and looked around the room like she was inspecting a rental property. Then, calmly, she said, "Dad's on his way." My stomach sank. "Why?" "We've done enough talking, Sarah." She sat down at the table, folding her hands. "It's not about fighting. It's about figuring out what's best for Sam." Those words, "what's best for Sam," sounded rehearsed, like something Victor had fed her on repeat until it became truth. "What's best for Sam," I said slowly, "is for his parents to raise him, not his grandfather." She didn't look up. "You've been unstable lately, Leo. Unstable. You've been angry, irrational, following us to Dad's house, sleeping in your car. It's not healthy." I felt my heart stop. "Sarah, you locked me out in the rain. You wouldn't answer the door. You wouldn't even let me see my son." She looked at me blankly, like none of that mattered. "You were scaring me that night." I took a step closer. "Sarah, I was begging you to let me hold my child." Before she could respond, there was a knock. Victor. He entered like he owned the place, because at this point, he practically did. Same smug expression, same controlled tone. "Morning, Leo," he said, brushing rain off his coat. "Let's have a seat." "I'm not sitting," I said, crossing my arms. "Fine," he said with a shrug. "Then just listen." He looked at Sarah, then back at me. "We're worried about you. Sarah's been under a lot of stress, and frankly, you haven't been helping. You've shown signs of emotional instability." My voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" He leaned forward, his tone low and condescending. "You've been confrontational. You've raised your voice, and you've been showing up uninvited after being asked to leave. You're not in a healthy state of mind, Leo. For your sake, and for Sam's, we need to make sure everyone's safe." I stared at him, my pulse hammering. "Safe from what?" "From me. From your behavior," he said evenly. Sarah's silence was deafening. "You're twisting everything," I said, my voice trembling. "You've been manipulating her since day one, Victor. You've turned her against me." He smiled slightly, like he'd expected that. "You're projecting, son. It's what people do when they can't take accountability." That word "son" again. He used it like a weapon. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He set on the table. "This is temporary," he said, "just until you get some help." My throat went dry. "What is that?" "An emergency custody petition," Sarah said softly. My world tilted. "You're taking me to court?" Victor jumped in before she could answer. "It's not about taking you to court. It's about ensuring Sam's well-being." You'll still be able to see him, supervised, of course. Once you've had time to work on your anger. My anger? I whispered. You've been provoking me for months. He ignored that completely, turned to Sarah. You've done the right thing, sweetheart. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my wife. I saw someone else, someone who'd been reprogrammed. Her eyes held no pain or doubt, just this cold conviction that terrified me. Sarah, I said quietly, you can't seriously think I'd hurt you or Sam. She hesitated, her lip trembling for the briefest second before she looked down again. Dad's right. You need time to figure things out. That was it. No argument, no tears, no hesitation, just finality. Everything inside me went numb. Get out, I said softly. Victor frowned. Excuse me. You heard me, both of you. Get out of my house. Sarah stood, picking up Sam with trembling hands. We'll be back when things calm down. No, I said, stepping between her and the door. You're not taking him. Victor immediately moved forward, his voice sharp. Step aside or what? I asked. His eyes darkened. You want to go down this road, Leo? You think that'll look good when we file the report? That word hit me like a brick. Report? He straightened up. Sarah's already spoken to someone. There'll be documentation. If you make this harder than it has to be, it'll only hurt your case. For a second, I couldn't breathe. They'd set me up. Every word, every argument, every twisted retelling. It was all part of this. He'd been building a case piece by piece, waiting for me to snap, so he could paint me as dangerous. Wow, I whispered. You've really thought this through, haven't you? Victor's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. I'm just protecting my family. I took a step closer, my voice low. She's my family, too. He didn't flinch. Not for long. That broke me. Watching Sarah walk out that door with our baby, while I stood there helpless, was like being cut open from the inside. The sound of the rain on the porch was the same as that night. Except this time, there was no begging, just silence. When the door closed, I sank to my knees. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours. The house felt hollow, stripped of everything warm. The bassinet sat empty, a faint imprint where Sam had been. And then the realization hit. This wasn't temporary. This was calculated. Victor wasn't going to stop until he erased me completely, legally, emotionally, socially. The next few days blurred together. Sarah wouldn't answer my calls. Every message went unread. I reached out to mutual friends. They either ignored me or said, maybe give her space. That was how it started. Quiet isolation. Then one morning, a police officer knocked on my door. He handed me an envelope, a temporary restraining order filed by Sarah. The words swam in front of me. Asterisk claims of emotional instability. Potential threat to child safety. Asterisk none of it true. Not one word. But there it was, stamped and official. Victor had done it. He'd found a way to turn me into the villain of my own story. I called my friend Ben, a lawyer. He sighed when I showed him the papers. This looks orchestrated. They're building a narrative that you're unfit. I rubbed my temples. How do I fight something like that? By documenting everything, he said. Dates, texts, witnesses, every little thing. You're not crazy, Leo. You're being cornered. But as much as I wanted to fight, part of me was just broken. Because this wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. My wife, the person I trusted most, had stood there and let her father take control of our lives. She didn't just believe him. She became him. I tried to see Sam once. Just once. I drove to Victor's house, parked across the street, and waited until I saw Sarah through the window, holding our baby. I didn't approach. I just watched. But Victor must have seen me, because a few minutes later, the police pulled up. Mr. Lawson, one of them said, stepping out of the car. We got a call about a possible violation of a restraining order. I wasn't even on the property, I said quietly. Still, the officer replied, it's best if you leave. That was the moment it really hit me. They'd taken everything. My wife, my son, my reputation, my home, and now they were trying to take my dignity too. That night, I sat in my car again, staring at the house through the rain. And I promised myself something. I wouldn't fight them with anger. I'd fight them with truth. Because the one thing Victor didn't count on was that I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone on my side, someone who knew him better than anyone. Someone who'd soon walk up to that same porch beside me. And when she did, Victor's smirk would finally vanish. But before that day came, things had to get worse. Much worse. Because the real betrayal hadn't even happened yet. That was still coming. And when it did, it shattered the last pieces of trust one had left. The weeks that followed blurred together like one long, sleepless night. I'd wake up to the sound of rain or the creak of the empty crib and forget for just a moment that they were gone. Then it would all come back. The court order, the silence from Sarah, the way Victor's smirk had burned in my memory as he walked out with my son in his arms. It wasn't grief that hit me first. It was shame. Shame that I'd let it happen, that I'd watched my own family slip through my fingers while I stood there frozen, too shocked to act. The house felt like a museum of failure. The bottles on the counter still lined up from when I tried to prepare for Sam's next feeding. The baby monitor blinking red but silent. The faint smell of baby lotion in the air, haunting. I tried to throw myself into work, but it was pointless. My focus was shot. I'd sit at my desk, staring at the same email for an hour, the words blurring together. Every day felt the same. Wake up late, skip breakfast, pace the house, reread the court papers until I could quote them word for word. The language was so sterile, so clinical. Temporary order of protection, unfit environment, risk of emotional distress. Cold words that turned love and exhaustion into legal evidence. At first, I thought about fighting it immediately, but Ben told me not to rush. They're expecting you to explode, he said over the phone. If you get angry or push too hard right now, you'll feed their narrative. You need to stay quiet, collect everything, play the long game. The long game. It sounded logical, but living it was torture. Every instinct in me wanted to drive over there, to see Sam, to remind Sarah who I was. But I knew what Victor would do. Call the police. Twist it into another incident. So I stayed away. I went silent. And that silence, I think, scared them more than any outburst could have. Still, the quiet had its own kind of poison. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment, every word I could have said differently. The rain became my only company, tapping against the window like a cruel reminder of that night they'd locked me out. Sometimes I catch myself talking to the empty crib. I'd whisper things I never got to say. Asterisk, hey buddy, you smiled for the first time last week. I missed it, didn't I? Asterisk, then I'd stop and stare at myself in disgust. I was losing my mind, talking to a ghost of a life that used to be mine. I stopped eating. The neighbors started to notice. One morning, Mrs. Jenkins from next door left a casserole on my porch with a note. You're not alone, Leo. I didn't have the heart to tell her how wrong she was. Then came the worst part, the online smear campaign. Someone, I didn't have to guess who, had started quietly poisoning my reputation. Mutual friends began to unfollow me. People from work stopped inviting me to things. Then one afternoon, a coworker pulled me aside. Hey man, I heard some stuff about you. Is it true? What stuff? I asked. He hesitated. That you got violent? That you were seeing someone else during the pregnancy? I froze. What? No. Who told you that? He shrugged uncomfortably. I don't know. It's just been going around. People say Sarah's been going through a lot. I knew immediately who was behind it. Victor wasn't content with just taking my family. He would try to erase my character, too. Make sure that when the custody hearing came, I'd look like a stranger, not a father. That night, I sat in my car outside the courthouse parking lot, clutching the steering wheel until my hands ached. For a second, I thought about driving off somewhere, anywhere, and never coming back, just disappearing, starting over. But then I thought of Sam's face, the way he'd grip my fingers so tightly, even in his sleep. No, I couldn't disappear. I had to rebuild, quietly. That was the moment something in me shifted. I stopped reacting and started observing. Every interaction, every phone call, every text, I logged it. I bought a cheap notebook and began writing everything down in detail. Dates, times, quotes. I saved screenshots. If they were going to turn my life into a story, I'd make sure I had the receipts. Ben helped me draft a plan. You need proof that you're stable, responsible, and consistent, he said. Start building a record. See a therapist. Join a parenting group. Get letters from coworkers. Show them who you really are. So that's what I did. I started therapy, Not because I believed what they said about me, but because I wanted to understand how to stay grounded. My therapist, Dr. Anya, was blunt but kind. "You're not broken, Leo," she told me after our third session. "You're grieving something that's still alive." That line stuck with me. Grieving something that's still alive. That was exactly it. Over time, I started piecing together how deep Victor's manipulation went. Sarah's social media had turned into a curated shrine of motherhood. Photos of her and Sam, always captioned with some vague, inspirational quote. Never a mention of me. But then in the comments, I noticed something odd. A woman named Eleanor would always chime in, short, sympathetic comments like, "You're doing great, sweetie. Stay strong." I didn't think much of it until one day I scrolled back through old photos from before the baby was born. There she was again. Same woman, different tone. Comments like, "So happy you're building a life with Leo." And then suddenly, they stopped, right around the time Victor started showing up more often. Curiosity turned into suspicion. I looked her up. Turns out, Eleanor was Victor's sister, Sarah's aunt. I'd met her once years ago at our wedding. A quiet woman with sad eyes. Victor barely spoke to her. I remembered Sarah once mentioning they had a falling out after their mother's death, but she didn't know why. So why was she suddenly back in the picture and taking Sarah's side? Something about it didn't sit right. I reached out carefully. I sent her a message that just said, "Hi, Eleanor. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I know things are complicated right now, but I could use someone who remembers what things used to be like." I didn't expect her to reply, but 2 days later, she did. Her message was short. "I've been waiting for you to call me. You need to know the truth about Victor." That was the first time in weeks that my heart beat faster for something other than panic. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, neutral ground. She was older than I remembered, her hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. "I know what he's doing," she said, her voice low. "He did the same thing to my husband." That made me pause. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Victor has a way of breaking people down, convincing everyone around them that they're unstable until he takes control. He did it to me years ago. I didn't see it until it was too late." As she talked, I realized I wasn't just hearing gossip. I was hearing a blueprint. The same tactics, the same language. She told me how Victor had isolated her from her own family, manipulated finances, rewritten stories until she doubted her own memory. "Sarah doesn't know," she said softly. "He's doing to her what he did to me." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of clarity. This wasn't just about a father-in-law who disliked me. This was a pattern, a method. I left the cafe with my hands shaking, but not from fear, from purpose. I spent the next few weeks quietly gathering everything Eleanor told me. Stories, records, old letters. She still had some of Victor's old documents from when he'd taken her husband to court years ago. Different circumstances, same language, same patterns. I was still at rock bottom, but now I could see the way out. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through patience. Because I finally understood what this was, a game of control. And the only way to win was to stop playing by his rules. So I smiled politely in court hearings. I answered every question calmly. I never raised my voice, never let them see the anger they wanted to provoke. Behind the scenes, I kept building, documenting, connecting, preparing. And when the time came, I'd walk up to that same porch again. But I wouldn't be alone. The woman standing beside me that morning wouldn't just expose Victor's lies. She'd destroy them. But that part comes later, because before I could get there, Victor found a way to strike one more time. One final, cruel move that almost broke me completely. The rise didn't happen overnight. It came slow. So slow that, for a while, I didn't even realize it was happening. It began with small wins, the kind that don't make noise, but start shifting the ground beneath you piece by piece. I started by rebuilding my routines. Waking up early again, making breakfast, even if it was just for me. Cleaning the house like someone was coming home. I didn't want to live in a place that looked like I'd given up. If Victor wanted to paint me as unstable, I'd make sure every detail of my life screamed the opposite. Therapy became my anchor. Every week, Dr. Anya and I worked through the anger, the guilt, the confusion. She helped me untangle years of quiet manipulation that I hadn't noticed. "You were groomed to believe conflict equals disrespect," she said once. So you let people walk all over you. You thought patience would fix what only boundaries could. That line hit me hard. She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to prove myself reasonable that I forgot being reasonable doesn't mean being silent. By the end of the third month, I had something resembling stability again. My work performance improved. My boss even pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You've really stepped up lately. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I didn't tell him that the secret was simply having nothing left to lose. The legal process was slow, but I followed Ben's advice to the letter. No outbursts, no impulsive messages to Sarah. I let my lawyer handle everything and focused on building the record of who I really was, a steady, capable father who'd been slandered by a control-obsessed man. Meanwhile, Eleanor became my unexpected ally. We met weekly, sometimes at that same cafe, sometimes at her little cottage on the edge of town. She'd share memories of her brother's past schemes, and I'd take notes, matching them to my own timeline. We found eerie overlaps, phrases, tactics, even identical phrases used in affidavits from decades ago. Victor's game was predictability wrapped in manipulation. He'd isolate, gaslight, and document just enough to look credible. But Eleanor had seen it all before. He always underestimates people, she told me. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, but he's lazy. Eventually, he slips. That prediction would prove true sooner than either of us expected. About 5 months after the custody order, I received a call from a social worker, someone assigned by the court to evaluate both parents. I braced myself for another uphill battle, but instead, the woman on the other end said something that made me sit up straight. "Mr. Lawson, we've conducted preliminary interviews," she said. "I just want to say I'm impressed by your composure through all this. You've made every appointment, provided documentation on time, and your therapist reports are consistent. That goes a long way." It was the first time in months anyone had told me I was doing something right. A week later, I had my first supervised visitation with Sam. I can still remember the moment they brought him in. He was bigger, rounder, his eyes brighter. My heart nearly stopped when he looked at me and tilted his head like he almost recognized me. When I picked him up, he touched my face, curious. It was such a small thing, but for me, it was the beginning of everything. After that visit, I sat in my car for an hour, crying quietly. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. For the first time since it all began, I believed I'd get him back. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually. Eleanor kept feeding me information. Old letters, family court documents, even a few old audio recordings she'd found in a box labeled tax files. In one of them, Victor could be heard berating her husband over the phone, using the same tone, the same phrases he used with me. Asterisk, "You're not stable enough to raise her. You're lucky I'm not reporting you." Asterisk, Ben listened to those recordings and shook his head. This man's pattern is gold. It shows intent and repetition. Courts hate manipulators who recycle tactics. While we built the case quietly, I started building my life publicly. I began volunteering at a local youth center, a place for young dads trying to navigate fatherhood. It gave me purpose again, and it didn't go unnoticed. The center director wrote me a character reference letter that later became part of my custody file. Slowly, my reputation began to shift back. People who believed Victor's version started seeing the cracks. I posted a few photos, not defensive ones, just snapshots of my daily life. Cooking, hiking, volunteering. No long captions, no bitterness, just quiet consistency. Eleanor told me once, "The best revenge against a liar is stability." And she was right. But the real turning point came the day I ran into Sarah unexpectedly. It was in front of the courthouse, right before a case review. She was carrying Sam, bundled in a small blue blanket. For a second, she froze when she saw me. The wind tugged at her hair, and she looked smaller somehow, less sure of herself. I smiled gently. "Hey." She hesitated, then said hi. It was the first word we'd exchanged without lawyers in the room. I nodded toward Sam. "He's getting big." Her lips trembled just slightly. "He loves music," she said. "Every time I play that lullaby you used to hum, he smiles." That tiny detail hit me harder than any legal win could, because it meant I wasn't erased from him. Not completely. Then, before I could say anything else, Victor's car pulled up to the curb. He stepped out, instantly tense when he saw me. His usual smirk flickered for a second, just enough to reveal a crack. "Sarah," he said sharply. "Let's go. You're late." She flinched. That reaction didn't escape me, or the social worker standing nearby, who saw the whole exchange. For the first time, Victor didn't look untouchable. He looked rattled. After that, the court hearing started shifting tone. My lawyer began introducing evidence that made Victor squirm. The recordings, the old letters, character witnesses who'd known both him and Eleanor back in the day. Each piece chipped away at the mask he'd spent decades wearing. Meanwhile, Sarah started changing too. Slowly, subtly, she'd stop looking at him for validation during court. She'd glance my way more often, as if trying to read the truth for herself. I never spoke out of turn, never accused, never raised my voice. I just showed up, calm, prepared, and unshakable. Dr. Anya once said, "Power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from no longer being controlled." I finally understood that. 6 months in, the custody evaluator submitted her final report. It wasn't perfect. It still recommended shared custody for now, but her conclusion made my lawyer smile. "Both parents are capable caregivers," she wrote. "However, there are concerning signs of external influence on the mother's decision-making. Further observation recommended." That single sentence was a crack in Victor's fortress. I could tell it terrified him. A week later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was shaky. "Leo, it's Sarah." It was the first time she'd called me since the day she walked out. She didn't sound angry, just tired. "Dad's been different lately," she said. "He's been trying to control where I go, who I talk to. I don't even know who to trust anymore." I took a deep breath. "Sarah, you don't have to explain. Just make sure you and Sam are safe. That's all I care about." She was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I don't think I ever realized how much he's been controlling both of us." That was when I knew the tide had turned. From there, everything started accelerating. The court began reviewing the new evidence. My visitation expanded. Sarah agreed to meet with me privately once, without her father knowing. It was awkward, tense, but human. She cried halfway through and admitted, "He made me believe you were dangerous. That's how he gets control, by making everyone scared." I didn't say, "I told you so." I just nodded. "Sarah," I said quietly, "the only way this ends is if we stop letting him choose what happens next." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know." The next morning, Ben called with news that made my stomach flip. "We've got a new hearing date," he said, "and Eleanor's agreed to testify." That was the moment I realized the rise wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. For me, for Sam, and even for Sarah. I wasn't the man begging in the rain anymore. I wasn't the one locked out while they laughed. Now I was the one standing tall, steady, with truth on my side, and time working in my favor. And when I walked up to that same porch again, I wouldn't be alone. The woman standing beside me would finally make Victor face the truth he'd buried for decades. But before that day came, he made one last desperate move. One that nearly destroyed everything I'd built. It all started to come together the day Eleanor and I sat down at her kitchen table with a dusty box of old papers and cassette tapes. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood polish. She poured us tea without saying much, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the lid off the box. Inside were decades' worth of documents. Letters, bank statements, family photos, even legal notices. Some were yellowed with age, others more recent. But what tied them all together was the same handwriting scrolled in the margins. Victor H. Everything he ever touched, she said quietly. Every lie he built his life on. I spent hours going through them. The pattern was undeniable. Victor had done this before, not once, not twice, but 3 times. To his own sister, to her husband, and even to an old business partner who'd sued him years ago. Each case ended the same. False reports, character assassination, and then a quiet settlement where Victor came out on top. But the part that made my stomach twist was the evidence Eleanor found near the bottom of the box. A small stack of envelopes with Sarah's mother's handwriting. They were dated months before her death. Letters addressed to Sarah, none of which had ever been opened. When I asked Eleanor about them, she looked away. He kept them from her, she whispered. After her mother died, he told Sarah there were no letters. Said she didn't want to be remembered that way. I stared at the envelopes, my chest tightening. Sarah's mother had been sick for years. Those letters were likely her last words to her daughter, stolen by the man who'd raised her. That was the final puzzle piece. I knew exactly how to expose him now, but I couldn't just storm in and throw accusations. Victor was too careful, too practiced. Every move had to be calm, deliberate, the way he taught me to lose. Ben agreed. You can't just accuse him, he said. You have to make him show everyone who he really is. So that's what I planned to do. The upcoming court hearing would be my stage. Eleanor would testify, but her testimony alone wouldn't be enough. I needed Victor to lose control in front of everyone, to reveal the monster behind a mask. To set that up, I started laying the groundwork weeks in advance. I requested copies of old legal records through Ben, quietly gathered statements from people who'd worked with Victor in the past. I even contacted one of his former colleagues, a retired contractor who remembered him vividly. He ruined my life, the man said bitterly over the phone. Accused me of stealing from our business. Took everything. I still have the records if you need them. I did. Piece by piece, I built a case that painted the full picture, not just of one manipulative act, but of a lifetime of manipulation. The kind of evidence that could collapse a reputation overnight. Sarah, meanwhile, was starting to see the truth for herself. The more she pulled away from her father, the more desperate he became. He'd show up at her house unannounced, berating her for betraying family. Once she even recorded him, a 5-minute voicemail where he ranted about how no one leaves Mark Harrison's family without consequences. That recording became our golden ticket. When Ben heard it, he grinned. That's it. That's the nail in the coffin. But I didn't want just legal victory. I wanted clarity for Sarah, for Sam, for everyone he'd fooled. The day of the final hearing came like a storm that had been building for months. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and rain. Sarah sat a few rows ahead with Sam's stroller beside her. She looked anxious, but when our eyes met, she gave a small nod, the first real sign of trust between us in nearly a year. Victor arrived moments later, striding in with that same smug confidence he always wore like armor. He nodded curtly to the judge, smiled at Sarah, and shot me a glance that said, "You're already finished." But for the first time, I didn't look away. Ben opened our case with composure. He didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. He simply presented evidence slowly, methodically, like peeling back the layers of a long-buried lie. The letters came first. These were written by Mrs. Harrison to her daughter before her passing. Ben explained. They were withheld intentionally by Mr. Harrison for over 15 years. Victor's composure flickered for half a second. The judge frowned. "Mr. Harrison, is that true?" Victor straightened. Those letters were personal matters. My late wife was unwell. Her mental state was compromised. I was protecting my daughter. That was the crack I needed. Because Sarah, hearing that, reached in her purse and pulled out one of the letters she'd read only weeks earlier, the one where her mother had written. Victor means well, but sometimes his love feels like control. She passed it to the judge without saying a word. Victor shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. Then came the recordings, Eleanor's testimony, the voicemail from Sarah, and finally the old audio file from his business partner years ago. The same voice, the same language, the same threats. When the judge asked if he had a response, Victor tried to stand. "These are private family matters," he said tightly. "You have no right." "Sit down, Mr. Harrison," the judge interrupted firmly. He sat, but barely. His hands gripped the table, his face red. The room had gone silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then Ben said, "Your Honor, we'd like to submit one final piece of evidence." He played a short clip, just 10 seconds long. Victor's voice, low and furious. "If you think you can take that boy away from me, you'll regret it. I made this family, and I'll decide who belongs in it." The courtroom erupted. Even the judge looked stunned. "Mr. Harrison," she said slowly, "this statement was made to your daughter." Victor sputtered. That was taken out of context. "Is that your voice or not?" He hesitated, then quietly, "Yes." It was over. That was the moment his empire of control finally crumbled. The judge's tone hardened. Mr. Harrison, your behavior constitutes a clear pattern of coercive control and manipulation. This court finds your influence detrimental to the well-being of both your daughter and her child. When the decision came down, it was swift and merciless. Full custody restored to Sarah and me jointly. Supervised contact only for Victor, pending further review. He stood there, pale, speechless, trembling with quiet rage. Sarah didn't even look at him as she gathered Sam into her arms. When she walked past him, he reached out slightly, a reflex, but she stepped away. That small motion, that single step, said everything words couldn't. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh, like new beginnings. Sarah stood beside me, holding Sam close. She looked at me with tired eyes, but a faint, genuine smile. "I found another letter last night," she said softly. "Mom wrote that she hoped I'd marry someone patient. She said he'd have to be strong enough to love me through my father's shadow." I swallowed hard. She knew. She always knew. "I just didn't want to see it," Sarah said. Eleanor joined us outside, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. "He won't stop trying to rewrite the story," she warned. "That's who he is. But now everyone's seen who he really is. That's something he can't erase." And she was right. Victor didn't show up to the follow-up hearing. Didn't call. Didn't write. It was as if he'd vanished. Word eventually got around that he'd sold his house and left town. But I didn't care where he went. His power was gone. Not because he'd been punished, but because no one believed him anymore. The real revenge wasn't the court ruling. It wasn't the evidence or even the humiliation. It was watching his influence dissolve into nothing. Seeing the man who'd spent his life controlling others end up with no one left to control. Weeks later, I found myself back on that same porch. The same one where I'd once stood in the cold rain, begging to hold my son. But this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside me, Sam asleep in her arms. Eleanor was there, too, holding a small bundle, the last of her brother's old letters, ready to be burned. As we stood there, Sarah whispered, "It's strange being back here." I looked at her. "It's not the same place anymore." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "You're right." And for a long moment, none of us spoke. The wind rustled the trees, the rain clouds cleared, and the morning light broke through. Quiet, steady, almost forgiving. That's when I realized revenge wasn't about making them hurt the way you did. It was about reclaiming what they thought they'd taken forever: your peace, your name, your power. Victor had stolen all three once, but now I had them back. And as I looked down at my son, sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms, I knew one thing for sure. That porch, the one where I'd once been locked out, would never hold that kind of darkness again. But little did I know, the story wasn't over. Because a few months later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name scrolled in that familiar, sharp handwriting. And when I opened it, my blood ran cold. The letter was thin, one sheet of paper folded twice. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, deliberate, the kind of penmanship that looked like it had been carved, not written. My chest tightened as I opened it, half expecting another threat, another attempt to reclaim control. But what I found was something else entirely. "Leo," it began. "Asterisk, you think you've won, but one day you'll understand why I did what I did. I built a world where Sarah would never have to feel weak, where she'd never depend on anyone. You destroyed that. You turned her against me. But remember this. You wouldn't be the man you are if I hadn't made you fight for it. I made you strong. You should thank me." Asterisk, no apology, no remorse, just illusion repackaged as legacy. The final words hit harder than I'd expected. Not because they hurt, but because they revealed the truth. He'd never change. Victor would die believing he was the hero of his own story. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it down beside the fireplace. For a moment, I watched the flames flicker and reflect off the paper. Then I tossed it in. The edges curled and blackened, and within seconds, the last thing he ever wrote to me was nothing but ash. After that day, life didn't immediately become perfect. It just became real again. There were no dramatic closures, no cinematic music swelling in the background, just quiet mornings, gentle laughter, and the steady hum of normal life returning piece by piece. Sarah and I started rebuilding slowly, cautiously. Therapy helped for both of us. She had her own mountain of guilt to climb, and I never pushed her to move faster than she could. Some days were still hard. There were moments when she'd flinch at small arguments, expecting the kind of explosion Victor would have had. I'd pause, breathe, and remind her, I'm not him. Over time, that reminder turned into trust. We sold the old house, the one where everything fell apart. Neither of us could stand the echo of those walls anymore. We found a small place closer to the lake, a single-story home with big windows and a creaky porch. The kind of place where silence didn't feel like punishment. Sam grew fast. He had Sarah's smile, her eyes. But when he laughed, really laughed, it sounded like mine. But for the first time, I didn't look away. Ben opened our case with composure. He didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. He simply presented evidence slowly, methodically, like peeling back the layers of a long-buried lie. The letters came first. These were written by Mrs. Harrison to her daughter before her passing. Ben explained. They were withheld intentionally by Mr. Harrison for over 15 years. Victor's composure flickered for half a second. The judge frowned. Mr. Harrison, is that true? Victor straightened. Those letters were personal matters. My late wife was unwell. Her mental state was compromised. I was protecting my daughter. That was the crack I needed. Because Sarah, hearing that, reached in her purse and pulled out one of the letters she'd read only weeks earlier, the one where her mother had written. Victor means well, but sometimes his love feels like control. She passed it to the judge without saying a word. Victor shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. Then came the recordings, Eleanor's testimony, the voicemail from Sarah, and finally the old audio file from his business partner years ago. The same voice, the same language, the same threats. When the judge asked if he had a response, Victor tried to stand. These are private family matters, he said tightly. You have no right. Sit down, Mr. Harrison, the judge interrupted firmly. He sat, but barely. His hands gripped the table, his face red. The room had gone silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then Ben said, Your Honor, we'd like to submit one final piece of evidence. He played a short clip, just 10 seconds long. Victor's voice, low and furious. If you think you can take that boy away from me, you'll regret it. I made this family, and I'll decide who belongs in it. The courtroom erupted. Even the judge looked stunned. Mr. Harrison, she said slowly, this statement was made to your daughter. Victor sputtered. That was taken out of context. Is that your voice or not? He hesitated, then quietly, yes. It was over. That was the moment his empire of control finally crumbled. The judge's tone hardened. Mr. Harrison, your behavior constitutes a clear pattern of coercive control and manipulation. This court finds your influence detrimental to the well-being of both your daughter and her child. When the decision came down, it was swift and merciless. Full custody restored to Sarah and me jointly. Supervised contact only for Victor, pending further review. He stood there, pale, speechless, trembling with quiet rage. Sarah didn't even look at him as she gathered Sam into her arms. When she walked past him, he reached out slightly, a reflex, but she stepped away. That small motion, that single step, said everything words couldn't. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh, like new beginnings. Sarah stood beside me, holding Sam close. She looked at me with tired eyes, but a faint, genuine smile. I found another letter last night, she said softly. Mom wrote that she hoped I'd marry someone patient. She said he'd have to be strong enough to love me through my father's shadow. I swallowed hard. She knew. She always knew. I just didn't want to see it, Sarah said. Eleanor joined us outside, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. He won't stop trying to rewrite the story, she warned. That's who he is. But now everyone's seen who he really is. That's something he can't erase. And she was right. Victor didn't show up to the follow-up hearing. Didn't call. Didn't write. It was as if he'd vanished. Word eventually got around that he'd sold his house and left town. But I didn't care where he went. His power was gone. Not because he'd been punished, but because no one believed him anymore. The real revenge wasn't the court ruling. It wasn't the evidence or even the humiliation. It was watching his influence dissolve into nothing. Seeing the man who'd spent his life controlling others end up with no one left to control. Weeks later, I found myself back on that same porch. The same one where I'd once stood in the cold rain, begging to hold my son. But this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside me, Sam asleep in her arms. Eleanor was there, too, holding a small bundle, the last of her brother's old letters, ready to be burned. As we stood there, Sarah whispered, "It's strange being back here." I looked at her. "It's not the same place anymore." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "You're right." And for a long moment, none of us spoke. The wind rustled the trees, the rain clouds cleared, and the morning light broke through. Quiet, steady, almost forgiving. That's when I realized revenge wasn't about making them hurt the way you did. It was about reclaiming what they thought they'd taken forever: your peace, your name, your power. Victor had stolen all three once, but now I had them back. And as I looked down at my son, sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms, I knew one thing for sure. That porch, the one where I'd once been locked out, would never hold that kind of darkness again. But little did I know, the story wasn't over. Because a few months later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name scrolled in that familiar, sharp handwriting. And when I opened it, my blood ran cold. The letter was thin, one sheet of paper folded twice. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, deliberate, the kind of penmanship that looked like it had been carved, not written. My chest tightened as I opened it, half expecting another threat, another attempt to reclaim control. But what I found was something else entirely. "Leo," it began. "Asterisk, you think you've won, but one day you'll understand why I did what I did. I built a world where Sarah would never have to feel weak, where she'd never depend on anyone. You destroyed that. You turned her against me. But remember this. You wouldn't be the man you are if I hadn't made you fight for it. I made you strong. You should thank me." Asterisk, no apology, no remorse, just illusion repackaged as legacy. The final words hit harder than I'd expected, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the truth. He'd never change. Victor would die believing he was the hero of his own story. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it down beside the fireplace. For a moment, I watched the flames flicker and reflect off the paper. Then I tossed it in. The edges curled and blackened, and within seconds, the last thing he ever wrote to me was nothing but ash. After that day, life didn't immediately become perfect. It just became real again. There were no dramatic closures, no cinematic music swelling in the background, just quiet mornings, gentle laughter, and the steady hum of normal life returning piece by piece. Sarah and I started rebuilding slowly, cautiously. Therapy helped for both of us. She had her own mountain of guilt to climb, and I never pushed her to move faster than she could. Some days were still hard. There were moments when she'd flinch at small arguments, expecting the kind of explosion Victor would have had. I'd pause, breathe, and remind her I'm not him. Over time, that reminder turned into trust. We sold the old house, the one where everything fell apart. Neither of us could stand the echo of those walls anymore. We found a small place closer to the lake, a single-story home with big windows and a creaky porch. The kind of place where silence didn't feel like punishment. Sam grew fast. He had Sarah's smile, her eyes. But when he laughed, really laughed, it sounded like mine. I still remember the first time he called me Dad again. It was at the park, chasing him through the grass, his tiny legs pumping as he shouted, "Dad, come get me." And I froze because it was the first time in over a year that word didn't feel heavy. It just felt right. Victor didn't vanish completely. He tried for a while to file an appeal, something about unfair bias, character defamation, the usual nonsense, but the court dismissed it before it ever reached a hearing. His influence was gone, and so was his credibility. Eleanor told me later that he'd moved 2 towns over into a small apartment above a hardware store. Alone. It's strange how karma works. You spend months dreaming about revenge, imagining them suffering the same pain they gave you. But when it finally happens, when you see the fall, it doesn't feel triumphant. It just feels quiet, emptier than you expect. Eleanor kept in touch with him at first, out of a sense of family duty, but after one too many manipulative phone calls, she stopped. He's the same, she told me one afternoon over tea, still rewriting history in his head. He tells people you stole Sarah from him. It's almost sad, really. I didn't need to hear more. By then, I'd learned something important. Peace isn't found in making them pay. It's found in walking away when they can't follow. Still, fate has a way of delivering the last act, whether you ask for it or not. It was nearly a year after the final hearing when I got the call. Sarah was in the kitchen making breakfast. Sam, babbling to himself in his high chair. The number was unfamiliar. When I answered, a calm female voice said, "Mr. Lawson, this is Nurse Campbell from St. Luke's Hospital. I'm calling about a patient, Victor Harrison." For a long moment, I didn't say anything, just the sound of the rain tapping against the window. Then quietly, "What happened?" She hesitated. "He's been admitted for heart failure. He asked for you." I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, just disbelief. After everything he'd done, after the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, now he wanted me there. Sarah overheard, her face pale. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. "Go," she whispered. "You need to." The hospital was quiet when I arrived. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, sharp and cold. When I stepped into his room, I barely recognized him. The man who once filled every room with authority now looked small, frail, a shadow of himself. Tubes ran from his arms, his skin paper thin. His eyes opened when he heard me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he gave a weak chuckle. "You came." "I wasn't sure I should," I said. "You shouldn't have," he muttered. "But you did. That's what makes you different." I stood there, unsure what to feel. There was no satisfaction, no closure, just a strange kind of pity. He turned his head slightly, his voice rough. I thought if I controlled everything, no one would leave. But they all do eventually. Even Sarah. I said nothing. He exhaled a long, shaky breath. "You were right about me. You always were." When he reached for my hand, I almost pulled away, but I didn't. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I wanted to know that this cycle ended with me, not with more hatred. His grip was weak, trembling. "Take care of her," he whispered. Better than I did. And then, like someone closing a door gently, he let go. I left the hospital without looking back. Outside, the sky was clearing, sunlight breaking through gray clouds. The rain had stopped again. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch, our new porch, not the old one. She held Sam on her lap while I told her what had happened. She didn't cry, just nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "He always thought love meant control," she said quietly. "I think that's why he never really had either." We stayed there until the stars came out. The air was cool, the lake still. I remember thinking how strange it was. How after all the noise and chaos and anger, the end came in silence. No shouting, no revenge speeches, no dramatic showdown, just the sound of the wind and peace. Eleanor came by a few days later. She didn't mourn her brother. Not really. She brought a small box with her, a few photos, some documents. "His lawyer called me," she said. "There's something you should see." Inside was a will. Not much in it. His debts outweighed what little he owned. But one line stood out. "Asterisk to my grandson, Sam Lawson, I leave my watch. It was my father's before me. May it remind him that time is the only thing you can't control." Asterisk, I stared at it for a long time. It was the first self-aware thing Victor had ever written. Sarah, and I decided to keep the watch, not as a memento of him, but as a reminder of what not to become. The following spring, Sam took his first steps on that same porch. The boards creaked under his tiny feet as he wobbled toward me, his arms outstretched, eyes wide with joy. Sarah laughed, a real, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard in years. And in that moment, I realized the full weight of everything we'd survived. All the pain, the manipulation, the loss. It led us here to this small, imperfect, beautiful life where we were finally free. People say revenge is sweet, but standing there holding my son as he laughed under the morning sun, I realized something better. Freedom is sweeter. And as I looked out across the water, the breeze brushing through the trees. I thought about that night in the rain, about the man who once laughed while I begged to hold my child. He was gone, and I was still standing. So I whispered, almost to myself, "You try to make me weak, Victor, but all you did was teach me how to stand in the storm." Then I turned back inside, closed the door behind us, and for the first time in a long, long while it stayed closed. Not to keep someone out, but to keep peace in.